3.4 million ounces of silver. Gone. Not stolen, not lost, just gone from the market in a matter of weeks. And the people who were supposed to tell you about this, they stayed completely silent. If you're interested in money, finance, or changing your financial future, like this video and subscribe right now, because what you are about to learn can change the way you see money forever. Now I want you to stop for a second and think about something. What if the things you were never taught about money, the stuff they deliberately left out of school, out of the news, out of every conversation your parents had at the dinner table, what if that missing information is the exact reason why most people spend their entire lives working hard and still end up with almost nothing? What if the silver market right now is giving us a warning, a signal so loud that the people who understand it are quietly repositioning their entire financial lives while everyone else scrolls through social media, completely unaware? That is not a conspiracy. That is not a scare tactic. That is a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history, and it is happening again right now. And by the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly what is going on, why it matters to you personally, even if you have never bought a single ounce of silver in your life, and what you can actually do about it. So stay with me, because this gets deeper and more important with every single minute. Let us start from the beginning, because to understand what just happened with silver, you need to understand what silver actually is and why it is not just a shiny metal you see in jewelry stores. Most people think of silver the way they think of gold, a fancy thing that rich people collect. But here is the reality that almost nobody talks about. Silver is one of the most used industrial metals on the entire planet. It is inside your smartphone. It is in your laptop. It is in solar panels, electric vehicles, military equipment, medical devices, and even the water purification systems in developing countries. Silver conducts electricity better than almost any other material on Earth. It has antibacterial properties that modern medicine still relies on, and unlike gold, which mostly just sits in vaults, silver gets used up. It gets consumed, and once it is consumed, it is incredibly difficult and expensive to recover. So when 3.4 million ounces of silver suddenly disappear from registered market vaults in a short period of time, that is not a small story. That is not a footnote in a financial newsletter that only hedge fund managers read. That is a signal. A loud, clear, flashing signal about where the world is heading and how it affects your money. But here's the part that will genuinely surprise you, and I will get to it in just a moment. First, let me explain something that most people have never had explained to them in plain English. The difference between paper silver and real silver. Because this is where the story gets very uncomfortable, very fast. Imagine you walk into a restaurant, you pay for a meal, and you get a receipt. But there is no actual food. The restaurant just keeps selling receipts over and over to hundreds of different customers, and they all believe they have a meal waiting for them. Now imagine that hundreds of those customers all show up at the same time wanting their actual food. What happens? The restaurant cannot feed everyone. It collapses. People panic. Some people get nothing. That is essentially what happens in the silver market when something called a short squeeze or a demand shock hits. For years, financial institutions have been selling what is called paper silver. Contracts that represent silver, promises of silver, claims on silver. But the amount of paper silver floating around in the financial system is dramatically larger than the amount of physical silver that actually exists in vaults ready to be delivered. Some estimates suggest the ratio is anywhere from 10 to 1, all the way up to 50 to 1. 50 paper claims for every single real ounce. And most of the time, this works fine. Most of the time, people never actually ask for their physical silver. They just trade the paper back and forth, making money or losing money on price movements, and nobody ever knocks on the vault door and says, "I want my actual silver right now." But what happens when people start doing exactly that? What happens when the industrial buyers, the manufacturers, the solar panel companies, the electric vehicle producers, what happens when they show up and say, we need the real thing? That is where the story gets serious, and that is exactly what the numbers from the past few weeks are beginning to suggest is happening. But here is what is even more important, and most people never realize this part. This does not just affect investors. This does not just affect people who own silver. This is a symptom of something much bigger happening in the global financial system, and it has a direct connection to your purchasing power, your savings, and your financial future. I will connect all of those dots for you. But first, I need you to understand something about how we got here. Go back about 15 years. The world was coming out of the 2008 financial crisis. Governments and central banks around the world did something that had never been done on this scale before. They started printing money. Not physically printing paper notes, but creating new money electronically, injecting it into the financial system, and using it to buy bonds, to bail out banks, to stabilize markets. The technical name for this is quantitative easing. But all you need to know is this. When you increase the supply of something without increasing the demand for it, its value goes down. That is basic supply and demand. If there are more dollars chasing the same number of goods, each dollar buys less. That is inflation. And that is exactly what started happening. Now fast forward to 2020. A global pandemic hits. Governments do not just print money. They press the accelerator to the floor. Trillions of dollars, euros, pounds, and every other currency are created and pumped into the system at a speed that had never been seen in modern history. And for a little while, it felt fine. Stock markets recovered, stimulus checks arrived, people bought things. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in mainstream media wanted to talk about at the time. All of that newly created money had to land somewhere, and a significant amount of it started flowing into hard assets. Things that are real, things that are limited in supply, things that cannot be printed. Real estate, gold, commodities, and silver. Because when people start to sense that the paper in their wallet is slowly becoming worth less and less, something deep inside them, something ancient and instinctive, tells them to reach for something real. And here is where the story of the 3.4 million ounces comes back in, because this does not happen in isolation. This is not just one random number on a spreadsheet. This is part of a pattern that has been building for years and has now reached a point where it can no longer be ignored. Silver inventories held in major registered vaults. These are the warehouses connected to the big commodity exchanges, the places where the silver backing all those paper contracts is supposed to actually live, have been falling consistently, month after month, withdrawal after withdrawal. And recent reports have confirmed that in a compressed window of time, 3.4 million ounces were pulled out of these inventories. Not transferred, not reclassified, removed, taken by parties who clearly decided they would rather have the physical metal in their possession than a paper claim that someone else might not be able to honor. Now, who does something like that? Who has both the financial resources to move millions of ounces of silver and the sophistication to understand why doing so right now makes sense? This is where it gets really interesting, because it is not ordinary people. It is not retail investors. The parties pulling physical silver out of these vaults tend to be industrial users who are starting to get nervous about supply chains, large financial institutions hedging against currency risk, sovereign wealth funds in countries that are deliberately reducing their dependence on the US dollar, and a growing number of high net worth family offices who see what is happening and want to get ahead of it. And that is the part that should make you sit up in your chair. Because when the sophisticated money moves, when the people who spend millions of dollars a year on financial research and intelligence start repositioning, history shows that ordinary people who are paying attention and act early have an opportunity. And the people who are not paying attention get left behind, every single time. But wait, because what happened next in the silver market changed everything, and it connects to something happening right now in the global economy that most people have never been told about. Here is a number that will shock you. Global demand for silver is currently at its highest level in recorded history. Not just high, the highest ever. Solar panel production alone now consumes more than 200 million ounces of silver per year. Electric vehicles require silver in their electrical systems and battery connections. The AI revolution, all of those data centers, all of those servers, all of those chips, they all require silver. 5G infrastructure requires silver. The entire green energy transition that governments around the world have committed trillions of dollars to, it runs on silver, literally. And here's the cruel irony that the financial media almost never discusses. The very technology that governments are pushing to fight climate change and build the future, that technology is one of the biggest drivers of silver demand in human history. Every solar panel installed on a rooftop, every electric car that replaces a gasoline engine, every new cell tower built, each one of these consumes silver. And unlike the silver in a piece of jewelry that can theoretically be melted down and reused, a lot of industrial silver is consumed in such small quantities, in so many different applications, that recovery is economically impractical. Which means the silver that exists above ground in usable form, ready to go, is being drawn down. And the 3.4 million ounces that just disappeared from vaults is a data point in a much larger story about a supply deficit that has been building quietly for years. This is where most people fail without even realizing it. They look at the price of silver and think the story ends there. But the price is just the surface. The real story is underground, in mines that cannot keep up, and inside industrial facilities that are consuming metal faster than it can be replaced. Let me give you a relatable picture of what this actually means. Imagine you have a water tank on your roof. It fills slowly from a small pipe. That is mining production. And it drains steadily as you use water every day. That is industrial demand. For years, the fill rate and the drain rate were roughly balanced. Sometimes there was a small surplus. Sometimes a small deficit. The tank level stayed roughly the same, but now imagine that industrial demand, that drain, has suddenly doubled because of solar panels and electric vehicles and AI chips. The pipe filling the tank has not gotten any bigger. Mining is slow. New silver mines take 5 to 10 years to develop. You cannot just turn on a tap. What happens to the tank level? It drops. And if it drops fast enough, at some point you reach the bottom and the system breaks down. That is not a hypothetical. That is what the data is showing right now. And when systems break down, prices do not adjust slowly and politely. They move violently, quickly, and without warning. But here is where I want to bring this back to you, because I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, okay, this is interesting, but I am a regular person. I do not have thousands of dollars to spend on silver. I live paycheck to paycheck. What does any of this have to do with my life? And that is exactly the right question to ask, because the answer is everything. Let me explain why. When physical commodities like silver go into a sustained supply deficit and prices begin to rise sharply, that price rise flows through the entire economy. The cost of manufacturing electronics goes up. The cost of solar panels goes up. The cost of electric vehicles goes up. The cost of medical equipment goes up. And those costs get passed on to consumers, to you, to the middle-class family buying a new phone, to the student trying to afford a laptop, to the working-class family putting solar panels on their house to save on electricity bills. This is not abstract. This is your life. And more importantly, what this silver story is really telling us, at the deepest level, is something about money itself. When physical assets start disappearing from paper markets, when sophisticated investors start demanding the real thing instead of promises, IT is almost always a signal that confidence in paper systems is eroding. And when confidence in paper systems erodes, the purchasing power of the money in your bank account erodes with it. This is the connection that most people miss. They see silver as a niche investment for gold bugs and preppers. They do not see it as a barometer of the entire global monetary system. But it is. It has been throughout history. And right now, that barometer is giving a reading that should make every single person who cares about their financial future pay very close attention. And nobody talks about this part, but there is a historical pattern that repeats itself with stunning regularity. Whenever paper systems, whether that is paper currency, paper gold, paper silver, or paper anything, get stretched too far from the underlying physical reality, there is eventually a correction. Sometimes it is gradual, sometimes it is sudden. But it always happens. And the people who understood what was coming and prepared ahead of time, they preserved their wealth. Sometimes they built new wealth. And the people who ignored the signals and kept all of their faith in paper, they suffered. Not because they were bad people, not because they were stupid, but because nobody told them what to look for. I do not want that to be your story. I want this video to be the moment you started paying attention. Not because I want you to panic, not because I want you to run out and spend your rent money on silver bars, but because awareness is the first step to making better decisions. And making better decisions consistently over time is how ordinary people build financial security in an uncertain world. So what can you actually do? What is the practical lesson here? Because I know that some people watching this are university students with almost nothing in savings. Some of you are salary workers who feel like no matter how much you earn, you never seem to get ahead. Some of you are parents working 2 jobs trying to give your kids a better life. What does the disappearance of 3.4 million ounces of silver mean for you specifically? Here's the first thing, and it is the most important. Understanding is the asset. Before you move a single dollar, before you make any financial decision whatsoever, you need to understand the environment you're living in. We are in a world where money is being created at unprecedented rates. We are in a world where the industrial economy is consuming physical resources faster than they can be replenished. We are in a world where the gap between paper promises and physical reality is wider than it has ever been in modern history. Understanding that environment means you stop making decisions based on old assumptions, like the assumption that keeping all of your money in a savings account that earns almost no interest is automatically safe. It feels safe. But if inflation is running at 5% and your savings account pays 0.5%, you are losing 4.5% of your purchasing power every single year. The number in your account stays the same or goes up slightly, but what it can actually buy goes down. That is a hidden tax that almost nobody talks about, but almost everybody pays. The second thing is this. Diversification is not just about stocks and bonds. Every financial advisor in the world will tell you to diversify. But most of the time, what they actually mean is put some money in US stocks, some in international stocks, some in bonds, maybe a little in real estate. What they rarely include in that conversation is physical assets, real things, things that cannot be printed, things that have intrinsic value because the world actually needs them to function. Silver, gold, commodities, physical real estate if you can access it. These are not guaranteed to make you rich overnight, but they have one property that paper assets do not always have. They cannot go to zero. A share in a company can go to zero if the company fails. A bond can go to zero if the issuer defaults. A currency can lose 90% of its value if the government prints too much of it. History is full of examples of exactly that happening. But an ounce of silver will always be an ounce of silver. It will always conduct electricity. It will always be needed in manufacturing. It will always have real-world utility. That is a form of insurance that most people do not even know they can have. This is where everything changes for the person watching this, who has been living inside a system that was never fully explained to them. The third thing, and this is the one that requires the most courage to actually do, is to start educating yourself about money in a way that schools never did. Because here is the honest truth. The education system was designed to produce workers, not wealthy people. It teaches you how to get a job. It does not teach you how money actually works, how inflation actually works, how the monetary system actually functions, or why certain assets preserve wealth across generations while others evaporate. That is not an accident. A population that deeply understands money is harder to exploit. So the fact that you are watching videos like this one, that you're asking questions, that you are trying to connect dots that the mainstream never connects for you, that is already putting you ahead of most people. Let me tell you about someone. Think about a typical person. Let us call him Rafiq. He works in logistics. He earns a decent salary. Every month he gets paid, pays his bills, maybe saves a little bit in his bank account, and just hopes that one day things will get easier. He has heard of inflation. He knows things are getting more expensive, but he's never understood why or what to do about it. He certainly has never heard anyone explain to him that silver inventories in major commodity vaults are being drawn down at record rates, and that this is connected to the same forces making his grocery bill and electricity bill go up every year. Nobody ever sat down with Rafiq and connected those dots. And so Rafiq keeps doing what Rafiq has always done. And the gap between his purchasing power and the cost of living slowly, quietly, almost invisibly widens. I do not want to be Rafiq's story. And I do not think you do either. Because here is what I know about you. You are watching this. You clicked on this video. Something in you is hungry for a clearer picture of what is happening in the world and how it affects your financial life. That instinct is valuable. That curiosity is a resource. And if you channel it into education, into awareness, into making even small but deliberate shifts in how you think about money and assets, the compound effect of those decisions over 5, 10, 20 years is extraordinary. The 3.4 million ounces of silver that vanished from the market is not just a commodity story. It is a story about trust, about the difference between real and promised, about the widening gap between what the financial system says exists and what physically, actually, undeniably exists. And every time in history that gap has gotten as wide as it is today, something has eventually given way. The question is never if. The question is always when. And the question for you is, will you be positioned thoughtfully before it happens, or will you be caught off guard? Here is something powerful that I want to leave you with. Wealth, real wealth, is not about being rich. It is about being resilient. It is about building a life and a financial foundation that can withstand shocks. A family that has a small portion of their savings in physical assets, that understands what inflation is and actively protects against it, that does not keep 100% of their financial life in paper promises. That family has resilience. And resilience is the real currency of uncertain times. Not silver, not gold, not stocks. Resilience. The ability to adapt, to absorb shocks, and to keep moving forward when other people around you are panicking. And the way you build resilience is through knowledge, through awareness, through understanding the signals that the market is sending, even when the mainstream media is too distracted or too conflicted to report them clearly. 3.4 million ounces of silver disappearing from registered vaults is a signal. The record high industrial demand is a signal. The persistent gap between paper silver and physical silver is a signal. The quiet but steady movement of sophisticated money toward hard assets is a signal. You do not have to be an expert to hear these signals. You just have to be paying attention. And here's the most powerful insight of all, the one I want you to carry with you long after this video is done. The people who change their financial lives are not always the smartest people. They are not always the highest earners. They are not always the ones who were born into the right family or had the best education. The people who change their financial lives are the ones who decided, at some specific moment, that they were going to start paying attention to things that other people ignore, that they were going to ask questions that other people do not ask, that they were going to make decisions based on understanding rather than assumption. That moment can be right now. This video can be that moment for you. The silver market is giving us a window into something deep and important about the global financial system. Behind every price chart, behind every inventory report, behind every data point about vanishing ounces, there is a human story. There are families trying to protect what they have built. There are countries trying to reduce their dependence on systems that are increasingly unstable. There are industries desperate to secure the materials they need to keep functioning. And there are ordinary people, people just like you and me, trying to figure out how to navigate a world that feels more uncertain and more complicated with every passing year. You're not alone in that feeling. And the answer is not fear. The answer is never fear. The answer is understanding. Because understanding gives you choices, and choices give you power over your own financial future in a way that nothing else can. So the next time someone mentions silver or gold or commodities or inflation, do not let your eyes glaze over. Do not think, that is not for people like me. Think about the water tank on the roof. Think about the difference between the paper receipt and the actual meal. Think about Rafik and decide that you are going to be the person who understood what was happening before everyone else was forced to understand it. That is the edge. That is the advantage that information gives you. 3.4 million ounces, gone. The question is not what happened to the silver. The question is, what are you going to do with the knowledge of why it matters? If you learned something new today, make sure to subscribe to Money Insights and like this video. More powerful financial truths are coming next.